Thanks for watching Lessons in Minutes with Jaylee. Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe.
We're going to explore that concept of correctional errors, which is a part of the control system that persons usually find a difficulty in grasping. At the end of the lesson, you should be able to demonstrate how to correct errors when the trial balance totals do not agree. So you should know how to correct those errors, and upon completing that correction, your trial balance should therefore be equal. The totals should agree with each other. You have gone through that process of preparing the ledger entries, balancing off the account. Now it's time to post to your trial balance. You have now posted and go out and have gone through that process of totaling of the trial balance in order to get it balanced. Upon doing that, you notice that your debit column is 38,400 and your credit is 38,800. A lot of times, once you reach this stage, you realize that it is not balanced. The thing that comes to mind and what you want to do is to basically tear out that ear off your head, because you're wondering to yourself, where is that error? And the reality is, it may have been more than one errors. No, the next thing that you end up start doing is to scratch your head and wondering what could have been that problem. So there is this big question, this big colorful question, because it's colorful, you don't even know where the errors are. You have to go through this stage of trying to detect where the errors are. And you're asking yourself, what could cause this now? What could have caused my debit side to be less than the credit side? But guess what? Don't worry, because there are stages and there are processes. There are things that you can do in order to correct your errors. Upon realizing that the totals do not agree, what you would do is to find the difference between two sides, and the difference of 400, which is short on the debit side, you record that in an account called suspense account, because the reality is you're left in suspense. You are left in suspense. You don't know where the error is. So I am in suspense. You know what? Create an account called suspense account and put that difference there. So whichever side is short of on the trial balance, that is the side where you would put the difference. If it was a credit side, the difference would go on the credit side, but again, in that suspense account, because in reality, you are left in suspense. You don't know where that error is. Upon doing that, your next step is to create a ledger account called suspense account. And on the side that is short, you're going to enter the date, enter the balance as per trial balance, and put that difference of 400. In this case, it's on the debit. So therefore, the entry is on the debit side. If it was on the credit, then of course, that entry would have been on the credit side. Now, I've mentioned the term suspense account. Why do we use suspense account? It is just simply a temporary account used to make the totals of a trial balance agree. Remember earlier, I said that you're in suspense. You don't know what caused that error. So filter that difference to the suspense account. But why do we prepare a suspense account? Why? Why are we in suspense? There may be three things. The first one, omission of the double entry. So you might have debited an account based on the transaction, but you forget to make that corresponding credit entry, and vice versa. Remember, the general principle of double entry is that for every debit, there is a corresponding credit, and vice versa. So you have made an entry, but you did not make the corresponding entry. So that's one reason. Another is that one side of the double entry is incorrect. So it might have been overstated or understated. Okay? So one side of the double entry is incorrect. The other is both entries are made on the same side of the account. So for example, you have made two debit entries instead of a debit and a corresponding credit, or you might have made a credit entry instead of a corresponding credit and debit entry. Okay, so those are the three reasons why you are in suspense. So guess what? We're going to now look at a worked example in correcting errors where the trial balance totals do not agree. And here is an example of a question. The credit side of J. Lee's trial balance was too small by $4,050. On investigation, the following errors were discovered. You're required to draft the journal entries to correct the errors. So we're going to look at the journal entries to correct the 5 errors above, and then we are going to prepare the suspense account to correct the errors. The reality is when you correct the errors, this value of 4,050 that is short on the credit side of J. Lee's trial balance, when you're finished correcting the errors, there would not be any balance in the suspense account. So we need to comb through these errors and find out why the trial balance for J. Lee is short by $4,050 on the credit side. So we'll begin. Purchase of stationery in cash, $450 was not entered in the cash book. So what was done? The purchase of stationery, that entry was made in the stationery account, but you're saying no entry was placed in the cash book. So it means that our cash account was not credited to reflect that there was a reduction. In correcting that error, we need to ensure that the credit entry is placed in the cash account to reflect the payment that was made. So because only one item is affected, one side of the entry is affected, it means that we're going to use suspense account to filter the entry, to complete the double entry basically. So our suspense account will be debited with $450 while our cash account is credited with $450. So we're placing the correct entry in the cash account, but because only one side of the double entry was not completed, we're using the suspense account to filter that double entry, to complete the double entry basically. What is our narration for that? It is simply correction of entry omitted from cash book, or I could say correction of entry omitted from cash account. Okay, we're now going to look at number 2. And number 2 reads, credit sale of $1,200 was posted to the debtor's account as $2,400. Credit sale of $1,200 was posted to the debtor's account as $2,400. What they're saying is that this sale that was made on credit to the debtor, which our debtor account should be debited and our sales account credited, the entry was placed in the sales account. However, they're indicating to us that the debtor's account, they're saying the error is in the debtor's account where we have posted $2,400 instead of $1,200. We're seeing that there is something wrong with the figure. So there is an original entry error, but only to one account, which is the debtor account. More than the amount was entered. So it means that it was overstated. Remember, when you're getting rid of the overstated value, you have to find difference between the two sides and place that difference on the opposite side of the entry. We'll have to assess what is that original entry that was made. Selling goods to your debtors on credit means that your debtors account would be debited and your sales account credited. So in this case, the debtors account was debited with $2,400. So that would be $1,200 too much. So what we need to do is to credit the extra that was placed in the debtors account of $1,200 so that will cancel out the extra that was placed on the debit side. And in crediting our debtors account, because there's only one item affected, we need to complete double entry. So we are going to debit our suspense account with that overcast value of $1,200, and our debtors account is credited with that extra $1,200 that was placed on the debit side. What is our narration? Simply correction of overcast of debtors account. We're now going to look at number 3. And number 3 reads, $500 paid for cleaning expenses was debited to cash account. $500 paid for cleaning expenses was debited to cash account. We are making a payment. But what they did in error is to show that we're receiving the cash. In fact, it's not receiving. So they're saying that the error is in the cash account. You have debited instead of crediting. So we need to make that entry in the cash account by crediting. Based on what we're seeing, there is a reversal of the entry in the cash account. So what we need to do is to credit the cash account, and to complete double entry, we're going to debit our suspense account. And because it's a reversal, we need to double the amount. So we're going to enter 1,000. So our cash account is credited with 1,000. Remember, once there's a reversal of the entry, put the entry on the opposite side. You're reversing the entry, and don't forget to double the amount. And our narration is correction of reversal of entry to cash account. We are now going to look at number 4. And number 4 reads, the total of sales journals was totaled too little by 2,000. So we're saying that the sales journal total was too little by 2,000 when you have add up. So basically, this amount at the end of a sales journal, remember, it is always transferred to your sales account. And if you have totally 2,000 too little, it means that you have transferred 2,000 too little to your sales account. So because it is too little, it means that that value that it is short of must be placed on the same side of the original entry. When we transfer from our sales journal to our sales account, the value is credited to the sales account. And because it is 2,000 too little, our sales account should be credited with that too little, the amount that is short of. And to complete double entry, we're going to use suspense account. Why? Only one side of the entry was incorrect. So we have to ensure that we use a suspense account as a temporary account to complete double entry. So our sales account is credited with the too little of 2,000 because we want to add that 2,000 now to the amount that is there to get the value, the correct value that should have been recorded in our sales account. And what is our narrative? Correction of undercast of sales account, or you could say understated value to our sales account, right? Now, number 5, returns inwards 300 was credited in the returns outwards account. So returns inwards 300 was credited in the returns outwards account. Returns inward, this carry a debit balance. So therefore, the entry should have been debited to your return inwards account. So that was end up credited to the return outwards account. We need to get rid of this extra 300 that was placed in the return outwards account that was credited to the return outwards account. So therefore, we're going to debit to cancel out that entry. So we're going to debit our returns outwards with $300. Now, our return inwards account should have been debited with that 300. So therefore, we're going to make that correct entry now. So we're going to put the entry in our returns inwards account, and that is 300. Now, based on that, what have you noticed? Our debit column has a total of 600 based on this error that we are attempting to correct. And we have to have the credit entry. There's nothing else for the credit entry. So therefore, we're going to use our suspense account to filter that. So we're going to use the suspense account to complete double entry. And we need 600 in total on that credit side to ensure that for this entry that we have, error that we have corrected, we have the same value on the debit and the same value on the credit. So We had to debit or return outwards account to get rid of that credit entry that was placed in it in error. We have to debit or return inwards account to show the correct entry that should have been made in the return inwards account. To ensure that our credit has the same value that is recorded on the debit, we have to use our suspense account to complete the double entry with $600. What is our narration? Our narration is correction of entry made to the wrong account and wrong side. So it was an error placed in the return outwards account in error instead of the return inwards. So there was wrong account in place. Also, it was placed on the wrong side because our return inwards account, based on the entry, should be a debit entry. But to the return outwards account, there was an incorrect entry. Now that we have completed part A, we are now going to proceed to part B, where we're asked to prepare the suspense account to correct the errors. The first thing that you need to do is to ensure that the difference in the trial balance is placed in the suspense account. So the credit side was short, so that value is placed on the credit side. What you need to do now is to make reference to the journal entries that you have made in part A in order to complete your suspense account. When we're finished, there should not be any balance in the account. So we're going to start with number 1. And based on number 1 correction, we say that the suspense account should be debited. So therefore, number 1, the details, the corresponding entry is cash, and the amount is $450. Next, we're on to number 2, and we notice based on that, our suspense account should be debited. So therefore, number 2, we're going to put debtors because debtors is the other item affected, and the amount is $1,200. Number 3, suspense is to be debited. So we're going to make that debit entry to the suspense account for number 3, and the item to be credited is cash. So our details is cash, and the amount there is $1,000. Number 4, suspense account is to be debited. Bear in mind that so far our suspense account is debited. Not in all cases your suspense account would be debited. This is based on the correction that should be made to the error. So bear in mind that your suspense account can either be debited or credited in correcting the error. But based on the nature of the errors that we have looked at so far, our suspense account should be debited. So number 4, we're going to make that debit entry where our suspense account is debited and sales account is credited. So our details is sales, and the value is $2,000. Let's move on to number 5. We're seeing based on number 5, now to correct the error, our suspense account is credited. So therefore, we're going to make that credit entry in the suspense account. In making the credit entry, we notice that our return outwards account should be debited with $300. So our details is returns outwards, and the amount is $300. Our return inwards account should be debited as well. So therefore, in the suspense account, the corresponding account is returns inwards as our details. Remember, we enter the name of the account that is affected, the name of the other account that is affected by the transaction as your details, because that is cross-referencing that is taking place there. It is saying to us, if you go to your return outwards account, you'll find the corresponding entry on the debit side. So for the return inwards, the value is $300. Now that we're finished entering the entries that should be placed in the suspense account based on the corrections, we are now going to total the suspense account. When you're finished, both sides should be the same. And once they're the same, it means that you have successfully corrected the errors. So when you add up your debit column, you get a total of 4,650, and on our credit side, there is a total of 4,650. So we can safely say that the errors were successfully corrected. Okay, and basically that is it for the correction of errors. What they would normally do in an extension in correcting the errors is to post the entries to the respective ledger accounts, right? So in this case, the cash account should be credited. So in your cash book, you're going to make a credit entry. Debtors account should be credited. In the debtors account, you're going to make a credit entry. And that is basically the procedure. So this is the end of our lesson in correcting errors that affect the trial balance.
Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe.